Hey everyone, how are you doing? Good. So there's a lot of pressure on me because I was told I'm the only designer in the room, both in the workshop, but also in the talk. So I'm the only design talk in this conference. So I hope this will serve as a good example, at least for my fellow designers who are touching Swift right now, SwiftUI specifically. So my name is Meng, and I teach designers code, but also I teach developers design. And recently, SwiftUI just came out. As you all know, everyone's going nuts over this. This is awesome. And I had a chance to create a course really quick, like just 3 weeks after it was launched, and learn a lot of things along the way. The first thing is that I believe that designers will love this, and I believe that even developers who want to touch design even more and have better standards will also learn to appreciate the details in SwiftUI. So let's talk about the problems. How many of you are creating layouts strictly in code? Show hands. Okay, so how many of you actually use interface builder or storyboard? Okay, so we have half of the room doing everything in code, and the other half is actually using a design tool, as I would call it, because it's a visual editor. It's something that a designer would be quite familiar with, but of course, it has its own problems. Let's take a look at the problems, shall we? So the first thing is the obvious one, which is there's no live preview. So in code, you're essentially designing in the blind, as I would call it. You're just in front of the code. If you're creating a lot of layout, if you're trying to make something that respects the design, and by the way, I was told in a workshop that designers deliver their design in JPEG. Is that true? I hope not, because nowadays, prototypes have become extremely sophisticated. People expect to create these crazy interactions and expect you to do them from scratch. Am I right? Like prototypes from Flinto with so many animations and gestures, from Principle, InVision Studio, a lot of tools in the market right now for prototyping. And you are expected as a developer to create everything from scratch in code or using storyboard. And that's a huge pain. So let's take a look at, storyboard or interface builder. Right now, there's no live preview. Auto layout is hard. Am I right? I mean, it's constraints. You have to take care of the conflicts, priorities, stack views, size classes, so many things that for developers, this is a huge struggle. So auto layout is really hard, and we need a tool that is invented today, not 10 years ago, that really tackle these problems. The third problem is collaboration. Believe it or not, this is something that is happening everywhere. And in code, it's something that is quite common. We all collaborate using Git. We make commits. We work in a huge team of developers for any project. In design, this is new. And it's new thanks to new design tools. Have you heard of Figma? Anyone? So Figma is getting huge. Sketch is getting cloud. And Framer is also getting cloud. So we have pretty much the main design tools really tackling collaboration, live collaboration between designers, between developers. And it's really making easy this whole collaboration between designers and developers. Yet, storyboard and the interface builder and Xcode has none of that. And we need to do better. So let's take a look at the next one. Interface builder was made for static design. Unfortunately, you cannot animate things, you cannot add events, you cannot, you still rely on code for all of these things, all of these interactions, and you can only go as far as what the inspector gives you. So that's a huge problem. For me, for designers. If you ask a designer to use storyboard, most of them would get really scared because they can't really do anything significant past the static design stage. So that's a problem. And the last point I think is quite important is that it's really a design tool for developers, right? And the problem I see for that is that developers are not trained to be visual designers, right? Like, I would be very surprised if all of you, or even half of you here in this room, how many of you actually use design tools like Sketch, Figma on a regular basis? So we're talking about 25% of the room. And if I look at Storyboard, if I look at Interface Builder, it's very similar to a design tool, and for good reason. There is a lot of struggle for creating a compelling design using this tool. And I like to think of Interface Builder as a design tool for developers, and it's not really a design tool for designers. So the struggle is for both sides. A designer would never want to use Storyboard because it's just so hard to deal with all of these constraints, but also it relies so much on code. And the developer would definitely struggle with the layout aspect of it, the constraints, and so on. I lost connection, unfortunately. All right, let me just. Okay. Now, I think before even looking at SwiftUI, we need to sort of solve this problem. We need to have live preview. I think that's obvious. We need a tool where every time you make a change, you're going to see the change in real time. You're going to be able to interact with it. So SwiftUI provides that. It needs to be adaptive by default, so you don't need to think about constraints. You should be given the controls and the tools right from the beginning and create a compelling design layout that adapts to all of these crazy devices that you have to design for. Apple Watch, iPad, iPhone of different resolutions, and of course the Mac and all of these new devices that are coming out every single day. It needs to be collaborative. So, it needs to be more code-oriented, if you will, because if you look at Storyboard, that's not the case. Yes, underlying that, there's the code aspect, but it's just not clean, as I would call it, right? I think you would say the same. So, and then we need a tool that really tackles animations, because since iOS 13, especially since the iPhone 10, gestures have become incredibly important in creating an app. If you look at the swipe up, dismiss gesture, all of these modal coming from the bottom, the Apple Maps, the Google Maps bottom card, all of these interactions require pretty sophisticated gestures and interactions that you wouldn't be able to create easily in Swift or in connecting to Storyboard. And we need a tool that does not scare both designers and developers, because it's really hard to make everyone happy, but we need something that brings the two together as much as possible. And I believe that SwiftUI definitely tackles these problems and really brings the two camps together so that there's more collaboration and we can create more awesome products along the way. I created a little video because I was really curious as to how SwiftUI would compare to creating a layout between the two platforms. One, on the left, we would have SwiftUI. It's all done in code, but we do have the live preview on the right side or the bottom. And then we have Storyboard on the right side, and we're going to try to redo the same layout. Would you like to see that? Let's see which one is faster. Okay? Let's go. All right, so basic stuff, we're bringing a bunch of controls. This time is a text. And we're using drag and drop. Believe it or not, drag and drop is available, and it works also with the preview. And on the right side, yes, we have a visual editor, and I'm embedding everything in the stack, versus in SwiftUI, it's all done automatically. So when you embed something or you bring a new element, especially in the preview, it's going to stack automatically. And we're all using the insert tool very easily using shortcuts. And then here we're setting the frame. So again, pretty much at the same speed so far. But I think the key is later on. So you can already see SwiftUI is getting ahead, and now I have to deal with constraints, right? This is the hard part. And on the left side, I don't have to do that because it's already done by default. Everything is centered. I don't have to drag things and, oh my God, which pixel that I have to land this on? And you know, by this time, I'm already tackling the corner radius, which designers love corner radius, and now the shadows. And here, done, SwiftUI, 1 minute 15. On the right side, still on the constraints, I have to deal with the conflicts, the priority, and now I have to deal with the round corners. How am I going to show my designer the beautiful round corners that they want so badly, right? And now I have to go to runtime attributes because the other way is to set IB outlets, and oh my God, this is going to give them a headache. And I haven't even set up the shadow yet, which has about 3 or 4 properties that I have to set up in code. So you can see 1 minute 15 and the other one 1:45 without setting the shadow. So it's safe to say SwiftUI is at least 50% faster than doing the same layout in storyboard, and I'm only scratching the surface. All right, so let's talk about the basics. So let's move back a little bit and see how we're tackling these very basic default settings. One of the struggles that developers have is when they build a layout from scratch, like, what numbers do I use, right? Like, you have to kind of scratch your head. You're trying to be pixel perfect. You're trying to inspect the design, and then you realize that you're basically just following a guide. But you're not really learning the fundamental of designs. You don't understand grid. You don't understand the default settings. You don't understand what makes a design tick, what makes it visually organized and so friendly to use. And one of them is spacing, right? So if you were to create a rectangle or any shape in storyboard or in code in Swift, you don't really have these amazing settings. But in SwiftUI, they made it so that the defaults are actually quite easy to use and they make sense. So for example, padding, without even setting any padding, I'm already getting the default 16, which is highly recommended by Apple. And you know, I definitely recommend to use the 4-point grid. So every time that you set any padding or spacing, if you can divide it by 4, it's what I would recommend as a minimum spacing. You know, and even as you scale it up. And definitely when you have a minimum padding, definitely set it to at least 8 or 16. The background color. So we're still able to use color literal. So how many of you use color literal or image literal? Okay, it's not everyone, but you should, because it allows you to really quickly prototype these colors and show to the designer. So one of the exercises that I would recommend any developer when you go back to your beautiful company is sit down with a designer and use a tool that they can quickly see what's going on, right? And definitely color literals is one of them. Or you can quickly change the colors and show them what is going on. And if they have some feedback, you can change it live. And this makes communication so much easier, and you're going to create a much better product. It's going to be cohesive, and at the same time, you learn to work with the designer. So corner radius, I don't need to tell you how important that is. All I needed to do was to set a modifier called .cornerRadius, set the size of the corner radius, which is 30. But a lot of you are asking, well, how do I make my app stand out? And yes, you guessed it. Boom, the smooth corners by Apple, right? This is what's going to make your app not look like an Android app, okay? So we're gonna have to do the clip shape using a rounded rectangle, and we're gonna set the corner radius, but also the style is continuous. So that's how you get these super ellipses, the Apple signature rounded corners that everybody loves. And you can see that pretty much everywhere. The modals, the app icons that you find in iOS. And yeah, that's how you would do it in SwiftUI. Next, shadow. Nowadays, you can't see it really well, but nowadays, like for example, in the Apple iTunes, we use contextual shadow. The contextual shadow is using the color of the card itself, and it's kind of like a glow, but it's using the same parameters as a shadow. And this is something that you would see in real life if the element itself has a very strong color against a very light background or a very contrasting background, like in this case. So yeah, the shadow is easily set using a modifier. We're setting the color literal, and on top of that, we're using a modifier on top of a value, which is the color, and I'm setting the opacity so that I can still use the color literal, and I just need to set the opacity on top of that. So this is easier to change and to make it flexible in code. This is something that I found that to be quite efficient when I'm building layout. And then we're setting the radius, which is 20, and then the X and Y position. So another thing that you need to know about SwiftUI is that it provides all of these amazing tools, and one of them is the fonts. So now we have access to 4 fonts for free. And you don't need to do anything else than just set the font system. And the one by default is set to default. And by the way, this is new since I believe Xcode 11.2 or 0.3. But most importantly, we have more fonts. We don't have just SF Pro. We also have SF Rounded. All you need to change is change the value to dot rounded instead. We have monospace. Boom, we have more animation going on because from the talks that I see, there's not enough animation, so I'm going to try to step it up. And then we have serif. Wow, holy shit. So and then we have, yeah, serif. This is the New York font by Apple. All of these fonts you can use for free. Work with dynamic type, which means that this works with any accessibility option, so such as large. And as you know, a lot of users use different values for the accessibility font options. And this is also very special to Apple. You know, as iOS developers, we really care about what Apple brings to the platform, such as accessibility. And you know, I definitely recommend that everyone use accessibility options, such as dynamic type. So how many of you? I'm actually curious. How many of you use dynamic types all the time? Not enough. Okay, so we need to step up here. Definitely, this is also going to make your work easier as a developer because you don't have to think too hard. There's already a system in place set by Apple for you to just use one of these values, such as title, caption, body, and you don't have to think, oh my God, I'm going to set the size to 11. How many designs have I seen in my career made by developers where the font size is like 9? I'm sorry, but this is not 2000, okay? We don't have tiny computers with low resolution screens where it's okay to have a font size of 9. So it's important to use, if you're not sure, it's important to use these values and dynamic types. It's really going to make your work easier, and you're going to make your users happier as well. All right, let's take a look at animation, shall we? So, I've tried to do a lot of animations using Swift in the past. First of all, I'm someone who uses a lot interface builder and storyboard, and the first struggle is to set it up. To set it up and have the IB outlets, everything to be in sync. And then the second is to set the animation itself. So you have to do like, animate with duration. And then, sometimes you have to use frameworks for that, and they're not always updated. So I think SwiftUI provides something that is really easy to use, and on top of that, we're using state. So we're really normalizing the way we're animating UIs nowadays. So platforms like React and Flutter is not so different anymore to SwiftUI. So I think that's good news because the knowledge is now transferable to multiple platforms, and I've heard that RX Swift is trying to sort of help with that as well. So a lot of you who have experience with reactive Swift is going to really be happy with how SwiftUI works. So let's take a look at the animation. The first thing is, if this plays. Okay, it's playing. All right, so we're setting the state. Very simple, we're setting the variable. Oops, I'm in gesture, sorry. Okay. So we're setting the state for the animation, and we're setting a Boolean, we're showing the animation or not, setting to false by default, and then we're setting the gesture. So when we're tapping on the actual card, we're gonna change between true and false. And now we're setting the modifier, which is setting the animation, and we're just asking, well, if this is true, we're gonna set to 0.8. If not, get it back to 1. And the last part is just to set the animation itself, so now we have a spring transition. So again, 4 steps, we're able to create a pretty compelling animation that is extremely flexible. And the animation property itself, you can set to ease in, ease out, timing curve. You have so many parameters. You wouldn't believe how many things you can do compared to, let's say, React Native, right? React Native, I have a course about React Native, and to be honest, to do animation is pretty painful. And on top of that, because we rely on third-party libraries, oftentimes there are so many missing parts that cannot take your UI to the next level. And what I appreciate about iOS development is that Apple really cares about these things, and I believe that they are the leader in that aspect. And so when a framework like SwiftUI comes along, it's really easy to find all of these tools, and especially since we're out of the beta, it's really easy to find all of these tools to create very sophisticated interactions. And I think if you really dig deep, especially in the modifiers and the effects, the visual effects and the animations, you're gonna find everything that you can possibly want from an animation library. Let's talk about gesture, because again, most apps requires gestures nowadays, and that's because it's become very common in iOS apps to have gestures. Users have come to expect it, and there's a lot of new paradigms such as the Apple Maps, that really depend on gestures. So gestures, just as simple as animations, we're gonna set the state. This time it's going to be a CG size instead. So we're going to set the point value. It's going to be X and Y position. And then we're setting the gesture. We can have many gestures, such as drag. And each gesture have their own events, which is going to feed us with a bunch of values that we can use to create our interaction. In this case, we're simply getting the location, while the translation of the drag. So when the user drag, we're getting the translation, and we're storing that in the state, so that using that state, we're applying to a modifier called offset, very straightforward, which is using the X and Y position, and then setting the width and height, which is X and Y, we can start dragging that card. Very simple stuff, and if you want to take it a little bit further, we have the unrelease event, unended, and when the user releases the card, then it resets the position. So again, using the state, very simple. And now the final part, just like with animation, we're setting the transition using the animation property. And again, we have access to all of these beautiful transitions and animations. On top of that, because we have gesture, now you can change the response time, the damping fraction, so that if you feel that it's a little bit laggy, you can have less response time, and you can modify as well the damping fraction if you want it to be more bouncy. you're going to see that I'm going to set to 0.3, and it's going to be very springy. So as you can see, it's a very sophisticated platform, especially when it comes to UI. I understand that the more abstract part is not quite there yet, but when it comes to UI, I believe that SwiftUI is definitely very compelling. So that's what I wanted to show you today, that SwiftUI provides all of these amazing tools that solve these problems that we're currently facing when we're using either everything in code or in storyboard. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed these little samples. I myself have created 2 SwiftUI courses so far, and I try to tackle the UI perspective, the gestures, the animations perspective, and you can follow me on Twitter. This is where I share a lot of these new techniques along the way, and it's definitely focused on UI and design. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. I believe we have 5 minutes for Q&A, if there are any questions. Okay, cool. Sure. So the question is, will the simplicity and standard provided by SwiftUI make all apps look and feel the same in the future? Is that a good and a bad thing? First of all, this is not true. Okay? SwiftUI is not here to make the apps feel the same, in any way possible, because all the customizations are there, and you can do anything. In fact, the apps that I create using SwiftUI is way more sophisticated than any other platform I've used. I mean, I've taught React, I've taught React Native, I teach design tools such as Figma, Sketch, and I've done storyboard, normal Swift Objective-C in the past. What I can say is that I've never felt more creative using a tool than SwiftUI. Why? Because the animation framework and the layout framework really provides all the customization that you would need to create something extremely complex and custom using all sorts of fonts. Because let's face it, we don't really take the time to really explore animations and gestures and even fonts as developers. And SwiftUI provides all of that for free. So yeah, I think that it's really awesome for creating custom layouts. Any other question?
No more question.
No more. All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mengi.